Yep, we're good to go.
All right, cool. So I'm not sure how much I want to talk about the sand, but what are your thoughts here? Shoving versus raising?
Okay, so I think this is probably the best place for me to start. So the context here is this is ACR, and generally speaking, I late reg ACR tournaments because you usually have like a 5 hour late reg
Hmm.
window or a 3 hour, as you probably know.
Yeah, I think this is the first sand of the tournament.
Okay, yeah. So what you'll find me coming in at 750 big blind, and I've explained this to a couple friends. I basically employ like a very high variance strategy where I will basically just do like some random shit, which is by no means um, uh, sound theoretically correct poker. Essentially, what I'm trying to do is like just make other people's HUDs just like completely out of whack and unreadable. So like I will just do like some really weird shit like um, maybe what you would say would be either like a very clear ship or a fold. Like maybe I'll limp it, maybe I'll min raise it. It's really just based on what I think I can get away with. And my whole goal when I enter these tournaments late regging is to basically build up like a 3x or 4x stack. So you could say, well, why don't I just like rip every single one of those spots? And I think that's fair to say, and I would like to have a discussion with that. But my goals in hopefully what you'll see in the early onset of a lot of these is just like A, trying to confuse the shit out of my opponents, and B, just taking really weird lines to try to get like a triple up.
Okay. So what argument should I start with first? So let's start with your first argument. You say you want to triple or quadruple up, like that's your goal. I mean, obviously that's nice. No one can argue that is not nice. But my question is, can you prove that, you know, can you prove that you should take more risk, that taking that extra risk is worth it?
Um, I can't necessarily prove it per se. I think the foundation of it is based on if you look at the size of the big blind, um, and just the what I've noticed about the structure of these tournaments. Once you get past the late registration window, you're usually like 70, 75, 80% of the field has been eliminated or rebought.
Sure.
So you're actually pretty like usually like in an hour, maybe a little bit more, you're getting pretty close to the money. So what I found is I basically like try to fast forward through all the early play and what I found is if I have a 3x to 4x stack, I'm able to like at that point sort of play my usual strategy. So you got me in terms of like proving. I guess the question is how I go about it, not so much as yes, we would agree that having 30K or 40K at big blind 1K is a good stack, right?
Right. We both agree with that
Um,
one. We both would prefer 40K chips to 10K chips.
right. Okay. So I guess to answer your question, and I am completely open to the idea that I am taking unnecessary risk, if that's kind of where you're going with that.
Well, it would be kind of hard. Well, I mean, you just said it. Like, you can't really prove that it's worth it to take that extra risk, and I can't prove that it's not worth it to take the extra risk either, right? I mean, I guess we're at a bit of a stalemate. I'm not sure. I don't know if like who's the burden of proof on. Sometimes like, whoever brings up. Typically, people who bring up like the more outrageous your claim is, the more like the burden of proof you need.
Hmm.
Like if I was to claim like evolution was caused by aliens or something like that, coming to Earth, I'd probably need the burden of proof. But if I was saying, hey, I think climate change is real, I probably don't need the burden of proof.
Right.
It's probably not on me. I'm not sure where your falls in terms of outrageous claims or anything, but basically, But you're saying you want to take a riskier and lower EV plays? Is that fair to say? To build a stack?
I think it's thinking. So if we say my goal is getting to 4x, what I don't want to do is like completely knit it up and then have people essentially just play, very straightforwardly towards that.
Right.
Um,
If you were to
and
put,
so,
so
yeah,
sorry to interrupt. So let's deal with that point because that's good.
sure.
So you don't want to knit it up, right? If you were to play your normal game, how tight do you think you would actually be at the stack depth?
Um, I'd be considerably tighter.
Hmm.
Um, Now the cutoff, I'm probably still ripping this no matter what,
Right. Well,
loose or tight.
let's say you had a bad orbit, right, and you lost 1,650 chips, right? Now you get down to 8,200 or something. Is your game loosening up, like if you're just playing a normal game?
No, no, I'm 100% push fold.
Right. Well, let's say you had in this spot, if you had, are you shoving a wider range with 10K or like 8,400 here?
No, I think it's all the same.
Okay. So if we were to plug in some stuff with ICMizer, like your push fold ranges widen as your stack gets shallower. So what happens is if you do start playing tight, folding some hands, your stack gets shallower, and then you shove more hands. Like the range you could shove here with, let me see. Let's see if I can find this. This would actually be. Um, have you ever worked with ICMizer?
Yeah, I actually had a couple hands. I've got a couple tabs open because I ran a few through. I had like an ace 10 suited for, it was like 12 or 13 bigs, and same thing with nines, and I was curious how good of a shove it was. And
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the cutoff. So this is 14 big blinds, right? So 14 big blinds. These ranges aren't perfect, by the way, but they're
mhm.
they're Nash, close enough to Nash. So 14 big blinds on the cutoff, you could jam 31%, right?
Mhm.
Now I said, what if we lost 1,500, right? Or 1,600? That's two big blinds. So that would be 12 big blinds, right?
Mhm.
So 12 big blinds, you could jam about 33%. So you're shoving like a little bit wider. Then once you go down to like 11, it's the same. This is weird. 10, it's like 34.2. At 9.5, it goes to 35. If you go down to like 7, you're shoving 39%. And this is true across like all positions and most stack sizes. So what happens is if you do end up playing tight, getting a bad run of cards, your standard for what you can shove goes lower. Like you need less of a hand to shove. So you end up like playing more aggro. So it's very hard to just like knit it up because eventually, like if you get down to six big blinds, you can shove like 41% on the cutoff and 51 here and 22 over here. Like the bigger difference might be UTG. Like if you have six big blinds UTG, you could shove 22%. If you have 14 big blinds, you can only shove like 11.8. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, you are, and I definitely wouldn't dispute any of that. I put a lot of weight into Nash and these push folds. I think the intangible here, and the burden of proof, I think, is in the like just doing the completely non-standard plays, which you could easily characterize as negative EV, but then it's like, how much credit do I give towards the like the what the fuck is this guy doing factor,
Mm,
right? Which is like something that I constantly trying to inject. I think I have knit tendencies from like early on, right? So
mm,
it's like I try to like figure out how to incorporate that, what that looks like, and sometimes it just looks like random stuff that like doesn't make any sense, right? But the intent is there. It's just obviously um, it's not necessarily like sound, right? So
yeah, I guess
um,
so you're kind of making an argument that you might be costing yourself EV now, but it will like it will confuse people on future hands, and you'll gain that EV back.
Absolutely. Just to throw like a little short story at you. So there's this player named Lappy. He twitches. He's like one of the ACR stormers or whatever.
Mhm.
And so he twitches every night. And there was this one video, or there's this one tournament I ran deep in. I forgot where the finish was, but I ran into him. And this guy's like live streaming. He's looking at my stats, and he's like, this guy is like a 32, 28, 10 aggro fish. This guy's a maniac. Obviously, he had like a limited number of hands, but like he's literally calling it out, and he's ripping fours on me, and I snap him off with jacks, right? And that's like exactly the image that I'm trying to go for, which historically I've struggled to create. And the only way to do that is to just like be an active player, right? Like be a target.
Right.
So I'm definitely, I think you're going to see this theme come up again, and I'm definitely looking to figure out like what is a better use of chips, right? Or like what is a better spot to go after. I can tell you right now, I'm not 3-bet squeezing from the big blind, right? I'm rolling over and just like playing that way too carefully, right? So I think you can help me channel some of this energy into other plays, right?
Yeah, I think I agree that setting up a nice image is definitely helpful, and but not sure how to approach this. So I'm just gonna say how I feel rather than going like with questioning. So
Sure.
personally, I love having that image of being really aggressive and then just getting people to punt. The problem is, and I've developed that image in a lot of scenarios. Um, Sometimes like in a vacuum, like just at that table, or sometimes just career wise, like people knowing me and knowing that I do crazy shit. But sometimes you just can't really cultivate that image because of the cards or because of the table dynamics. And so I don't really force things. What I try to do is I don't like to set a goal. I don't play poker with a goal. The only goal I have is to make good decisions, understand the table dynamics. I'm not trying to get to 30 or 40K. I'm not trying to cultivate a certain image. I'm trying to be aware of my image and figure out ways to exploit that. So I can be, if the way the game is rolling, I cultivate a tight image, unintentionally, then I can exploit that. If I get a really loose image, I can work with that. Um, so any type of image I can kind of work with. So I kind of just play the game, play the dynamics, and have an understanding of the type of image I'm presenting, rather
Mhm.
than forcing a certain image.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think this is another one of the big differences between my online and live, where I think live, I'm sort of embracing what you just outlined, which is like, okay, if based on the situational factors, I'm playing really tight, well, then I have to remind myself that I'm going to get a lot of credit in certain spots, or vice versa. If I'm playing really loose, then I have to be a little bit careful and not worry about overfolding as much sometimes, right? Um,
Right.
Whereas online, I think I'm just kind of going at it sort of like a madman in a lot of these things.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Um, so yeah, I think fuck, what was I gonna say? You go with what you were saying. I lost my train of thought there.
no, that's cool. I mean, again, I think this is going to come up, so I want you to call me out on these things, and I want to find other ways to do cool stuff.
Cool. Yeah, so I think I was gonna say, so one thing I might do is if I three bet like two hands that orbit, I might throw in like a third just because psychologically that's kind of a big deal. Once you put in the third three bet in a recent memory, it kind of just really psychologically people just think you're more aggro than you are.
hmm
So that might be something, when I'm at like a tipping point with aggression, just pushing it over. But I don't know. They're more of like advanced concepts are not as important. The problem I have is that I don't know who's paying attention early and middle game. I don't know, like you were saying, who has a HUD. Like I don't know who has a HUD. I don't know if any of these guys have a HUD. I don't know if they're paying attention. I don't know if they're, just 20 tabling, clicking buttons and watching like The Wire and, I have no idea what they're doing. When it comes to late game, I'm fairly confident people are paying attention, so a lot of this image stuff matters more. But yeah, that's what I'll say. You didn't do anything crazy this hand. I was just wondering if you should raise or shove here.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of went in a different direction. It was actually interesting, but I'm curious if you think we should raise or shove here.
I mean, it's a clear shove, just from like if we're talking Nash and any of the
Sure.
any of the programs.
Yeah, it's sure a plus EV shove, but yeah, should you shove or should you raise? I guess is the question.
I think so. So I guess what I would want to make sure I hit on in my response to you is I would call off a 3-bet ship, right? I want to be clear that I'm not raise folding here.
That makes sense. You're just like taking on more risk here and just raise calling it off. Okay.
Yeah, and the biggest reason I'm trying to trap blinds because I know the way the game is played right now, it's like everyone is just like, oh yeah, you can defend any two in the blinds all the time, and you're just good enough to like always get max value out of your, you know what I mean? There's just like so much of that thinking going on right now. So I'm just like, okay, well, like I want to keep the blinds in with this type of a hand. Like I'm in position. What's the big deal, So there you go. But I would definitely call off.
Okay. Are you calling off just because you think it's like plus EV, or you just think it's like close to neutral and you're going for like a gamble or something?
Probably right in the middle of both of what you just said.
I mean, would you do this without your 3 to 4x your stack strategy? Would you do this like, I don't know, in the money or something like that?
You're right. That would probably change it a bit. I probably would make different decisions post rebuy or post money. Yeah.
Okay, so you want to be raise calling? You'd probably just jam or something?
Yeah, I would just rip. If it was post rebuy, yeah, I would definitely just rip.
Guys, so actually I did want to talk about defending the big blinds. I think it's really interesting. Let me try and find the hand. This is a hand versus me. It's funny. We'll go back to that one.
Versus who?
Versus me. I'm fuck you, Carbon.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
That's too hilarious.
Yeah, and then you jam on me and I slip trapping 9s. It's funny.
Nice.
I guess that was
well played.
I guess that was one of your examples of just like gambling for the stack.
Well, again, another I think macro trend is people completing like almost all their range. I'm not seeing a lot of people doing the Fitzgerald like attack, big blind, small blind versus big blind. Let me like 3.3x or 3.2x you, and then you're gonna fold like 80% of the time or something like that. I'm seeing a lot more of like people just completing a lot of like all their suited junk, and I could even find I wouldn't expect any ace-x to fold there, but I mean clearly I have a lot of equity against a lot of hands that do call off anyway. So,
right.
But I mean that's the rationale. I mean it's
okay. Let me see. We're definitely going to talk about that hand too, because it's interesting.
Okay.
But I want to talk about so this spot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you think people are incorrect in defending really wide or defending like a hand like this?
I think it's really close. So I do want to take a look at. We should have focused conversations around defense, of course. I think there are certain types of hands that, like pretty much any ace rag, or a majority of the ace rags, and then like these really wide optimistic gappers. Mm-hmm. I think we're 21, 22 bigs effective, and I am just brushing up on reverse implied odds way too often for these spots. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to split my defense by basically I'm trying to fold these a little bit more, just knowing that I kind of botched the spot a little bit.
Right. It's an interesting problem. So, how much equity do you think you have versus his opening range?
Let's see. I mean, I've got a pretty good number of hands on him. 2015. Let's see. Where's your steal?
His race versus in the cutoff is like 42%.
Oh, okay. All right. So he's definitely active. So even if we went off of that, I mean, is that how you sort of base some of your estimations there? You just kind of go off of a stat like that has a pretty decent amount of trials?
So it depends on. So this is 42%, but it also depends on what the population does. So, for example, if the average person on the cutoff raises like 10%, it raises like 10%, which isn't the case, then I would skew this number lower because the odds that he's deviating that far are lower. But if the average person does like 40% and he's at 42, then I'm much more confident in this number because it's not that big of a deviation.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where like population tendency work comes into play. And so like the average person on the cutoff is probably around 28 to 32, depending on stakes you play and all that. So it is like a pretty decent deviation. And so I don't know, I probably like do it, say he's a bit lower than 42% based on that. But
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, how much equity do you think you have?
All right. So even if we put him right around that like 35%, 35 to 38%,
Yeah, I'm just gonna.
um,
Yeah, go ahead.
um, so I think I'd come in at magically right around like 35%, low 30s,
Sure. Yeah, I'm
32
not sure
maybe.
what it is. It should be around there. Yeah, so you have 35% equity, you need 21. So you don't have to realize all of that equity. But your argument for folding is that reverse implied odds, basically.
There's that, and I think something that's being lost is like I I mean maybe I'm over attributing this, but it's the idea of like, okay, you can say that that's the only equity you need, and yes, reverse implied odds is a thing, but it's also like like your ability to continue to capture the value
Hmm.
and actually take down hands post flop out of position, just kind of in this situation. I mean, what I just think when I flat here, I never really have a big hand. Um, like I'm with my stack, like I'm always gonna want to three bet like my top, call it 7-8% of hands.
Hmm.
And so I think it just makes for me having a very weak range. And
Yep.
I just feel like I'm constantly in situations where I have to put a lot at risk to actually take down what's going to be like a very marginal hand, right?
Yep. Hmm.
So it's either A, getting comfortable with that in smaller edges, or B, just like passing it up, right? And so I'm definitely interested in understanding how much I'm actually passing up.
Yeah, that's the exact point I was going to make, actually, that, so if this was someone's first time playing poker, like you just taught them the rules, they know the rules of the game, what do you think the odds are that they can make a call like this profitable?
Yeah,
Right?
very low.
Yeah, very low. Or let's say, this was, what's his name, Doug Polk or like Isildur. Like, what are the odds of like you realizing equity here?
They're definitely gonna make back the edge for sure.
Yeah, so it's definitely going to decrease. So it it really is like a function of skill level, like you were saying, basically, like your ability to be comfortable capturing that equity and all that.
Hmm.
Um, so we can be kind of rigorous with this. though. Have you ever defended these hands, these weaker hands, or anything like that?
Oh, definitely, definitely.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure we'll see hands that I defend that I definitely don't like to, but
Okay.
I
So
am mixing it up with folds like this. Yeah.
okay. So let's see something, right? So do you think if we ran a filter for you defending the big blind with a weak hand, like a pretty weak hand, like a bottom 30, 40%, and do you think you'd show a profit there? If you looked at every,
uh, that's a great question. I would not think so.
okay, well let's test it. So share your
Okay,
screen.
sure.
You got Poker Tracker, right?
I've got hold a manager too.
Okay, perfect.
Is that okay? Cool.
Cold Manager is way easier for filters, so that works. And
Yeah.
oh, you shared your screen already. Cool.
Okay.
All right, so what we're gonna do is you're gonna need to create a new tab, I think. Yeah, go to More Reports. It's a button in the middle, but a little bit higher than your mouse. Found it. Click Overall. Now the Overall tab is there. You just have to find it.
Oh.
Okay, now go to Filters. Hopefully we'll have a decent enough sample. We might not. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to tell Hold the Manager what kind of hands we want. So our position, we want to say we are just the big blind. So go to Basic Filters, Position and Action, and take off everyone except big blind for hero's position. Okay, so now we said you're just the big blind. Now we want to say you have a weak hand. Don't click that.
Oh, okay.
So go to Whole Cards Filters, because we just want to say you have a specific hand. So click Select None, and just click all the hands that you think are pretty marginal folds, like hands you aren't happy defending. And pick the borderline hands too, just so we have a bigger sample. Because the more selective you are with this, the smaller our sample and the less reliable our data.
Sure. All right. I gotta mirror that a little bit.
Yeah, if it's close, put it in there. We need the sample. Don't go into the tank. Be quick.
Okay.
If it's close, put it in there. No thinking. No
Yeah.
tanking.
Nah, I think that's good.
Okay. So you're comfortable defending like the queen. Put in like the offsuit queens too, because it's like
Yeah,
I'm
you're
sure you're
right.
not super pumped defending those.
Yeah.
And,
Uh,
and I guess you feel fine about more of these suited stuff. You never like fold the suited shit.
yeah, not
Okay.
well. Yeah, some of it, but yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you had a bigger sample of hands, that you could be more selective. It's just you only have 40K hands. So, okay. Next, we need to say you're facing a raise and you call. So, go to bet size filters, I think, and uncheck everything but pre-flop and leave facing bet on. Yep, see facing raise size. Yeah, and then do between. You see that greater than? Do between, I don't know, between 2 and 2.5 bigs or something. Hit the plus sign that you seen earlier. Okay, so let's see, we checked all the boxes. We have you're the big blind. We have that you're facing a raise. We have that you have a shitty hand. Now we need to say that you call. So go to other advanced filters. Um, yeah, take off flop and turn and river. Yeah, we just want to say you called and open. I don't know where the fuck that's gonna be. No, that wouldn't be a cold call, would it? Because you already have the big blind in there.
Yeah.
Maybe saw flop. Yeah, you might have to dip. Maybe VPIP? No. because we don't want to say that you 3-bet. I guess we could say that you VPIP'd. So say you VPIP'd,
Okay.
hit the plus sign,
That's true. Okay.
and then find something that says you 3-bet. Go upper. Did 3-bet. A little bit upper. Scroll a little bit upper. Yeah, there we go. And hit false. False. And hit the plus sign. Okay, so you
Okay.
did not 3-bet, you did VPIP, and that should work. Okay.
Okay.
And oh, let's do one more thing. Go to tournament filters. And let's say antes are in play. Scroll down lower, all the way to the bottom. Antes in play. Hit the plus sign. All right. Yep. And hit OK. And so this will give us your BB per 100, and you have a very small sample. So if you folded, you would have lost your big blind plus your ante. So if you folded, you would have lost your big blind plus your ante. So that's
like,
you know,
be like 110 or 115 or something.
Yeah, we only have 61 hands, so it would only have been like 75 or something. So you are losing defending these. So we're your smallest sample.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have evidence that, hey, I can't defend these. So like we talked about, what's your argument for not defending these? Well, I fucking lose. Well, now you're showing me that you're losing. So one, this helps you prove, not only helps you prove that you're right, but two, you get to focus on these hands and see what's going on, and just focus on what's going on when you defend these hands, and like review all these hands and work on that spot. And that's what's great about Hold'em Manager, is that any spot you want to focus on, you can run filters and be as concise or precise as you want, and just look at those hands, rather than like looking at a whole entire hand history, and it's just a whole bunch of different hands from different positions and different spots and all that.
Right.
So you can save this filter and go back to it later if you want to study it later. I can show you how to do that.
Okay.
Hit more filters.
Sorry.
And hit save tournament filter. Yeah. Yeah, and call it like big blind defense with shitty hand.
Okay.
With crap. Hit save.
I guess that's.
I don't know why it's saving under ignition original hands. That's kind of weird. Hopefully you can find it. Whatever.
Yeah, it's fine. All right, I'll just put it desktop for now.
Smart play.
All right.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, you can do that for any spot. So that puts us at a bit of an impasse. Well, you were saying like, hey, I don't think I can capture this EV, and you don't have like perfect evidence, but I mean, kind of shows that you kind of know what you're talking about. Like, you've been losing, and you're right about that. So
right for the wrong reason. Gotta love poker.
I think you're. What is the wrong reason? I feel like you're right for the right reason.
Well, I think sometimes you like make that fold,
Mm-hmm.
and then you see because you have nines and you see these two guys going to war, and then it's like ace, eight, and sevens, and you're just like shit. And then like obviously you would have lost the hand, and you're like, I folded for the wrong reason, but it was the right decision. It's like that's how I feel about this. Like my strength is going to come from you forcing me to prove something, as opposed to just like taking it and I totally get that from you. That's not your style. You're not going to let me just like blow smoke. So that's cool. I love this.
Right.
I think what I would want to do is go after these though, right? Like, why am I botching these hands? Is this the reason why I'm actually losing? Is it just like...
So you should, in my opinion, be able to defend these for profit. And I mean, I don't have much of a sample is the problem. Hold on. Let me see my sample. Hold on.
Okay.
But like I was talking about, it really depends on your skill level and ability to realize that equity and who you're making those calls versus. Um, I'd like to think I fold more versus stronger players, but kind of depends on my mindset. Sometimes I like to dick swing a bit and defend too wide, but
Hmm.
that is something you can consider. Like, is this guy a reg or is this guy a fish? And maybe call more versus the fish and fold more versus the reg and all that.
Yeah, I think it's also yeah. So I think that's a great premise to go off of. I think I'm also curious to know the drop off point too. I mean, we're splitting hairs with such small sample sizes, but like, if I could have a million hand database or simulate it out as such, be really interesting to know like what are the hands that I can just completely eliminate and keep in. Like, really, where's that drop off point? But um, I think what I need to do. So going into this, I kind of had this whole like I'm not there yet
Mm-hmm.
mentality towards defending, and I think what I'm getting from you is you have to just be there. Like you just have to like trust the process, and then if you're making fatal errors, it's probably for other reasons.
Right.
So,
So we identified, I think, an area we need to work on because, in my opinion, these should be good defenses. The math states that should be good defenses. All the top players defend this range, um, and that is kind of like an argument. I don't know if that's I don't think it's really a fallacy. Like, if most of the top players are doing something, that's probably decent evidence that it's the right play. Uh, it's not it's not like for sure, just like our database isn't for sure, right? But most top players, I don't know, probably 95% of players with over, X profit or players playing the high stakes defend all these, right? Um, so there are like pretty good arguments for defending these.
hmm
So I guess my question is, how do you think you should go about improving at defending these crappy hands? Or playing this position, rather. Playing your range in this position.
um, well, I think there's a couple things that I have to do. One I can say for certain I'm not doing, which is I have to attack pre-flop. I have to attack more. So if I see, this guy 38-40% steal, every all other positions he's just like playing normal range, and then cut off and button he's at 40%. Um, there's certain hands, and this might not be one of them, or maybe it's the perfect hand to do it with, but I need to attack that to make back, some of that loss, that overhead that I always carry.
Okay.
This post flop, assuming I'm not attacking and I'm just defending purely.
Right. So let me
Um,
rephrase my question. Like, how are you
okay.
going to deepen your understanding of post flop here? So that way you can capture more EV. Like, greater understanding leads to greater EV. So how are you going to deepen your understanding of that aspect of the game? Or deepen your ability to play it? I mean, it isn't all about understanding. I mean, it could just be repetition, right? It's kind of like a mix of both, right? But yeah, go ahead. I'm rambling.
No, 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 no. It's making me think. So I think that's twofold. So one, I have to identify the culprits of my big losses and plug those. So hopefully it's just I like spazzed or maybe got unlucky or something.
Mhm.
And hopefully it's not a bigger problem like I just, you know, I suck playing out of position problem, which I mean, if it is, it is. We can address it. But so I need to look at where are the big losses coming from. But then I think I also need to just I think I just need to study the spot, just like looking at the wins, the losses, and in between,
Mhm.
and just kind of get a feel for how these hands play. Um, like basically on average, when I lose, what does that look like, and how much do I lose? And when I win, what do I win? Just getting a better feel. I don't have a framework right now for this. That's what I'm realizing.
Right. Yeah, it's quite tricky, and so the problem with studying poker, as with other things, is like you don't get that same feedback, right? So if I'm playing tennis and I hit a bad forehand, like it's very obvious, like the ball's just not going to go where I want to go, right? I mean, almost always that's the case. You know, if I have bad form, I'm going to miss most of my shots at basketball. In poker, you very rarely get that sample. Like you have 61 fucking hands, right? And you can make a good bluff and lose. You can make a bad bluff and win. You can make a bad value bet and win. You can make a whatever mediocre neutral EV play and get a super negative EV result or super positive EV result. So it's very difficult to kind of weed out what's working and what's not without a good framework for how to think about the game.
Hmm. So I guess, from here, I think it's clear what I need to do, which is obviously widen defense. This is very clearly in the defending range, but then I have to come back to these spots and reevaluate
Right.
as you get more and more data.
Right. So you can do that. There there are other ways you can approach this other than defending more hands and potentially losing some chips. And how can you where can you gain like insight or extra knowledge, outside of yourself? Is a situation aside from me, because this is something we could work on, obviously, together. But where's like another area where you can gain some insight or and all that?
Well, I think just other credible sources of information. So just whether that's training sites or just
Right.
whatever information you can find on blind defense. I think I don't have it, but I saw a couple videos from Upswing's master's course where there's some modules on big blind defense, right? So like
Right.
things like that.
Yeah, so it's a very difficult aspect of the game, so there should be videos on it. Another route to go is potentially Pio Solver, which I have. I don't know if you're familiar. Are you familiar with the program?
Yeah, I've never personally used it, but I've watched a few videos where they've used it.
Right. So that has been really helpful for me for big blind defense and something we can kind of use together. But I mean, it depends. Like, it's not a small investment whether you want to buy it or not.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's potentially worth it if you're playing enough volume. I don't know what kind of volume you're putting in, and if you're interested in that type of thing. It kind of sounds like you're interested in working with that type of program and doing all that type of stuff, but I don't really know your situation, your interest, and all that. So I'm not saying like, hey, go buy it, but think about it, whether you want to buy it. Um, and I think an interesting thing we could do is like discuss like theory of defending, what you kind of need to do, what you don't need to do, and we have, I don't know. Well, I mean, I guess we said we'll just go whenever, however long. So my question to you at this point is, I marked 30 or so hands. They vary quite a bit. We can go over those hands, or we can look at your big blind defense, and I can help give you a framework for how to think about how to analyze those spots on your own.
It's a good question. I'm sort of
So I don't give you the option unless I think they're like fairly close in EV.
okay.
So I just choose. I'd rather you choose what interests you more. Sometimes like people want to change up, and you just feel like you want to change up, get overall perspective. Sometimes people just like want to dive right in, go to a focus point. Like doesn't. I'm not sure what line is best. So
I think what I'd like to do, I would definitely like to get the hand history review in. I always get a lot of value out of I mean, I get a lot of value out of everything, but I'd like to do maybe the next session we can do is
Mhm.
more of like a database analysis, and then that's one of the topics, right? Like I'd almost love for you to say, okay, like here's the top 5 things I would go after in your database analysis. Doesn't have to be that format. I'm just
No.
spitballing here.
Okay.
So, okay, so
Yeah.
on
So
to
yeah. So let's start from the beginning. So I guess you have a few options. So we can go kind of quick, and I could give you like quick overview of spots, like, and kind of just tell you my general thoughts on them, and you can kind of like write down, and you'll get like a few different paths to go. Or
okay.
we can like go what we've been doing now, which is like we might not get through one or two more hands. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
I think my intuition was just to like go through them kind of quickly and give you an idea of like stuff to think about. But it's up to you.
Yeah, I like the fast pace, but at the same time, if you see something that you think is really important or there's like it's going to give you deeper insight into how I think and approach similar spots, I'm perfectly fine with us,
Yeah,
staying there for a few minutes.
yeah,
But a fast pace is cool.
yeah. The problem is we're running close to end of time, and that usually takes a bit longer. I mean, it's generally worth it, but we're like running close to end of time, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well,
If
as far as time goes, how much time do you have on the backstop? Like, can you go another half hour
I
or an
can go,
hour?
I can go another half hour without crashing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. At some point, if you work with me long enough, at some point I just get to a point where my brain doesn't work anymore, and I just tell
Okay,
people to stop. But I'm not at that point yet.
that's totally fair.
So this spot's really interesting, especially when you're not looking at it through the lens of like, hey, I really want to 3x and 4x my stack and take risks. Um, so uh, the question is like, how do I phrase this? If so, if I told you jamming made you like 300 chips here, or let's say half a big blind, does that mean that you should jam?
No, I mean if the EV of checking back, getting
Right.
getting to see a flop in position with these stack sizes, yeah, I mean I would believe that
How would
there's
you,
more EV.
what would be the first step you would take to try and guess how much EV you make by checking?
I would probably want to run it in some sort of tool.
Okay. It's vague.
Um, yeah,
How
I
would you get
guess
like a decent estimate at least?
um, I guess I'm trying to think of what the best tool to use for this is. I guess maybe that's PioSolver. I think
Yeah, that would
doesn't.
definitely be the best tool, but we don't. I don't have PioSolver pre-flop, and it would take forever to run.
Oh, right.
Aside from PioSolver pre-flop, the $2,000 program or the $1,000 program.
Um, I don't know.
Okay, so what I would start with is how much equity you have versus my limping range. I mean, that isn't a perfect, scenario because you don't equity and EV isn't the same exact thing. But if you had 35% equity, for example, or like one third equity, right? How much do you think you make checking? If we lived in a perfect world where one third equity meant you get, just lines up perfectly, how much would checking make you here?
Yeah, I get the equity component of it. How to translate that into actual EV?
Hmm.
I don't have. I don't know how that would work.
Okay, so the way it works, it's all just like by the amount that's in the pot, and you get one third of it. I mean, this is like a very rough math right here.
Okay.
So this isn't perfect. Like the equity doesn't correlate to EV like one to one, but you can say that maybe your EV is somewhere around, you make around somewhere 740 chips checking. And now what you can do with that is say, well, if I'm jamming, I want to make at least somewhere around there. 400 chips on a jam is not worth it. And then you can run the math and run the sims and see like how much money you make jamming a hand like this, or how often you would need me to fold to actually profit that much, and what hands make over a big blind shoving and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So this spot's pretty important, pretty interesting, and you kind of have to look at that aspect of it. And yeah, that's kind of how I would go about it. I think 8-7 just makes too much money checking, but I definitely could see it being good versus a lot of players. And another thing you could do that's more empirical is you can go in your Hold'em manager, right? And like you could see like, hey, what happens when the small blind limps and I raise or I jam, for example. Maybe you just put you raise or maybe you put you jam, depending on like what kind of sample you have. You probably have to do both. You could just say like anytime you raise and see how often you actually get folds. And I've done this same thing recently, and I found that one, people fold too much, and two, like people are never three betting. Over 150 hand sample, I think I got three bet 5 or 6 times and shown a big hand like three or four of those times. So once I seen that, I just started raising more. So what's really hard in poker is that it's really hard to tell what works and what doesn't, and you kind of have to be rigorous to figure out, what actually works and all that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you jam versus me. I stack your ass like a boss.
Next table.
Do you ever limp here? I mean, not with this hand, sorry. I just mean like in general.
It's all based on tendencies, right? If I have the archetype of a player and they're really aggro, yeah, I'm gonna limp because I know I'm gonna be in 60-40, maybe 65-35 scenario quite a lot. So I will limp to induce, but I will rip if.
So I don't mean with this hand, but would you limp like a really weak hand here, or what do you think about limping with small blind and all that? I remember you saying it was a trend. Is that another one of the trends you don't buy into, or what do you think?
Well, I think with this stack, it's obviously a lot less interesting. I think it's more interesting if I have like a 20 big blind stack or 20 to 25 bigs, in which case I've been trying to attack more the big blind. Once again, it really just depends on the player. So I lean attack when I can get away with. And actually, players I respect, or if I think they're very aggro, I will actually just fold. Probably, I will obviously fold the most amount of times against them. So the way I approach these spots is really based on the tendencies that I'm just playing adaptive at this point.
Right. Why do you think limping isn't interesting at 10, 11 big blinds here? Like you're just too shallow to limp?
Yeah, well, I guess I shouldn't say interesting. I think it's just much more clear. Like, if I had, say, 18 to 20 bigs and I limped, let's just pretend I limp full range, and then I get ripped on, I'm actually not very well, I guess it depends on ICM considerations, but I'm actually not very likely to call it off. I mean, if it's a player that I have like very clear, like they're doing this any2, then like, yes, I'm happy about snapping it off. But I have a lot more limp folds than limp calls when I'm at 20 bigs as opposed to 10. I think that's my point.
Right, as you should. But what are like the weakest hand? What type of hands are you limping here? Or should you limp or what?
Um, I think high card X, so meaning Queen X plus, and then something like Jack 7 off, and then I'm probably going to complete almost any suited.
So I haven't done that much work on it, but on 10 big blind stuff, most of my work's on 20 big blind stuff. Most of the work I've done on it was 20 big blinds rather. Uh, so I think, well, just looking at the math of it, right? Uh, you're getting 4.6 to 1 versus a random hand. Tell me why I should fold. Why can't I limp deuce 3 offsuit? You know? Or jack deuce off or anything like that.
I think you need to have like a fold range. Like I understand the theory,
Mm-hmm.
um, but that's where it's funny because it like contradicts my early statements around like I'm a madman, I'm crazy, I'm doing all this crazy shit all the time. And then like now I flip the script where I'm like, okay, well let me actually splice, like let me have a bottom. And so from the math perspective, maybe it's like you should complete 100% any two, but I think it just gets back to the idea of how do I make money there?
Yeah.
Like,
It
um,
is the same problem as defending the big blind, right? It's realizing that equity, and I think it's the hardest spot in poker, limping the small blind. Uh,
yeah.
so it's even more difficult than the big blind, in my opinion. So yeah, I mean, both of you just have ridiculously wide ranges, and knowing when to bluff, when to call, when to value bet, when to check your value, when to check raise.
Hmm.
Super difficult spot. And you also can't be, people are jamming more, you can't be limp folding all that much, but what you can do is experiment with limping a wide range and see what actually happens. Try and do it versus weaker players who you think aren't going to jam and get some data and all that. You can see
Hmm.
what happens when other people limp and pay attention. Are they getting jammed on when they limp 10 bigs or and all that? So it's something you can do.
Hmm.
But it might be another spot where it's just hard to turn profit. So quickly, because I want to get through some more hands.
Okay.
So general rule of this spot is like, so the problem is if you jam hands like this and creating a good strategy, like if you want to create a good strategy and you jam hands like this, you're taking out hands out of your raise call range. So now your raise call range gets smaller and smaller. As it gets smaller and smaller, you can't raise fold more. If you only have, are you familiar with combinatorics? Like combos?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
so yeah, if you only have 100 combos of whatever, of raise calls, if you have 100 combos of raise calls versus 50, in one scenario can't raise nearly as much, right? So you want your raise call range to be wider, and like you were saying, getting big blind to defend is probably a good thing when you have ace queen. I would guess it's probably better than unfolding with the bottom, especially if they're a weaker player who doesn't know how to play this. Um, so these should be kind of like in your raise call range, and the hands you jam should be hands like you're not happy raise calling with. Maybe your weaker ace X's that you don't want to
Hmm.
face a jam with, and all that. But if you feel comfortable raise calling a hand, you should basically always raise call.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Um, the reason I thought this spot was interesting because this is kind of like a thin jam where you're making a little bit of money. The problem is like you're making a little bit of money, but you get a bunch of these free hands here later, like button, cut off, hijack, that position. those are pretty profitable positions for you. And if you bust here, you won't be able to play those. So it's not as strictly like, hey, I'm making 100 chips, I jam here. But you're missing out on these spots. So you kind of have to shove like a little bit tighter out of the small blind. Than Nash would state sometimes. Or, I mean, people overfold so you could jam wider, but I don't know if this is a jam. It's probably just like goes into the limp range. It's probably
Okay.
more profitable as a limp and lower variance. You get to see your button cut off hijack all the time.
Hmm.
So when you jam here, you probably bust out of the tournament 30-40% of the time. So that's 30-40% of the time you don't get to play all these nice hands in that position. Sucks.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, I'm gonna go like a mix between like just going glossing over spots and telling you what I think versus like just actually playing them out. I'm just gonna skip that because I understand why we did that one. Okay, so is this a call you normally make, or is this just like I want to get another 10k or so, 20k, and get the stack?
Post rebuy, no, but pre rebuy, yeah. I take
Okay,
these fishy kind of spots as I would label it.
okay, cool. Yep, that's fine. Okay, so he bets, you call, he bets again, you call. Why did you call river here?
I don't know if you have showdown percentage here, but I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, it sucks. I got half my stack in there, but I think it's really expensive. It's a very expensive fold, but I mean, when you look at it now, you realize he has like every combo of king queen
Mm-hmm.
that could be playing it this way, especially the suited ones.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just didn't think that. So first of all, I lose to all aces because his kicker's always going to play. He's under the gun. He's always going to have the better ace.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just see him. I don't see him triple barreling, turning into a bluff a hand like king queen. I think that he's happy to check that back. Um, sorry, kings or queens.
Okay,
So
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think I just deduced that, and I hope that I was looking at showdown stats and seeing some like going to showdown low, winning high kind of scenario. When I see huge disparity there, I usually feel like perfectly fine with laying down the river. Like, unfortunately, this is just like the style of combat that it is. It's like you have to call the two barrels, but then you can't call the third,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's the thinking here.
Right. Okay, here's a question. What do you think is a better call here? Ace deuce or ace 10?
Um, I think it's the same thing. Um, well, let's think about that. I'm just thinking about that 10 as a blocker and why that matters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, on the surface, I think it's the same thing.
Okay, so think about the hands you might be bluffing with besides king queen.
So your king 10 and your queen 10.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you were blocking those. The king 10, queen 10, 10-8, if he has that. I mean, he's pretty loose, so he probably even has 10-8 suited and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So ace deuce is actually a better call than ace 10. So this is actually one of the better aces in your range. Number two, you don't have any of the diamonds. So it would be even worse if you had like ace 10 of diamonds or ace 10 with the 10 of spades.
Mm-hmm.
So you have no diamond, you don't block any of his bluffs. So you should, so ace 10, ace 8 are all worse calls. Ace queen is probably better. but all your other aces are probably worse, especially if you have a diamond or a spade in them. So this is actually one of your better aces you get to river with. And this
Hmm.
guy has been pretty aggro, so I thought this was a pretty good call on your end.
Oh, I called.
Yeah, yeah.
I thought I folded.
No,
Wow.
and
Okay.
he did have the king queen.
There you go.
Yeah, so thought that was a good call. Nice hand.
Thanks.
Um, I like that you flat stuff like this in
Yeah.
position. I think it's cool. I felt like post flop you played pretty solid. I didn't see many mistakes, but it's also not that many hands, so it's really hard to tell.
Sure.
So this is an interesting spot. So it seems like, hey, I'm getting better odds. I need to defend here. But think about how tight his defend range is with given his stats and given his stack size. So he has a super tight range of probably like just like 3 or 4% of hands. Some of them are slow plays, right? So versus these two guys, you're just like crushed. So you
Hmm.
actually can fold quite a bit in a spot like this.
True, but I'm also playing like 40 bigs at this point. 40, even more, 45. So, um, I mean, what's more unattractive about this situation? That it's three-way or that it's a tight small blind that's flatting?
Well, it's the tight small blind because of the equity you have versus his range,
Hmm.
and he you have 40 big blinds, but you're playing his stack. He only has 15 big blinds, so versus
Right.
him, you only have 15. So there goes all those implied odds out the window.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean he ends up jamming and stealing all your ton of equity from you. He steals. Good fold,
Right.
by the way. I mean it's kind of a tough spot, but yeah, good fold.
Yeah, what can you do?
Yeah. But I used to defend those small blind spots super wide, and then my buddy told me, "Hey, this guy, this guy's range is super strong, and he's crushing you. You have to fold." It's kind of
Hmm.
like an eye opener. Um, this is an interesting spot because he has way more nines than you, so you kind of have to do a lot of checking on a board like this because he has like nut combo advantage. So you should just be checking a lot, basically. You're basically opening yourself up to getting kind of stacked. I don't know if you should check this shallow, but the deeper you are, the worse it is. Because like imagine having kings and getting check raised here with like 70 big blinds, 80 big blinds deep versus like just 20 big blinds like you have. Um, so a lot of people make the mistake of betting here. I don't know if that is even a mistake this shallow because I think you'd be pretty happy getting it in, but it's just something I thought I should bring up. And I'm not sure what's the merit of betting turn at this point.
I think it's a I mean that's a bet fold line right there. Just doing it here instead of the river, more or less. I mean, it's an action for me. It's a value that turn card's a value killer because I expect him to check any made hand anyway. I
Mm-hmm.
don't see him donk leading, so I might as well bet now as opposed to having another card come off. You know, where he like makes a straight and I'm checking back anyway, or he makes a four-card flush and I'm checking back anyway. So it's kind of a equity denial slash bet fold kind of line. I don't. I
What
find it
is what
really
does that
hard.
what does that mean? Bet fold kind of line. Like what does that mean? Like why does that add value to? Why is that like an argument for betting?
I think the argument is so it's touching on the idea of definition. Um, it it's that fine line between trying to induce a bluff and snapping it off versus being in control. And it's like walking that fine line between denying equity and actually inducing to gain equity. And in this kind of a spot, I think it's very close because I mean, can we agree that's like one of the worst turn cards I could have seen?
Yeah. So
Um,
when you say it's a bet fold line, what you're implying is that it's a line where you're trying to deny equity, simply.
I am until I get a lot of heat, in which case,
Yeah.
hopefully it's not an exploitative fold, but it's a fold, I would think.
Okay. So basically, there's spots where you're trying to deny equity, but you're also going to call a jam. But this is a spot where you're trying to deny equity and you're going to fold to a jam.
Right.
Okay. So that is a good point. Like you want to deny equity, right? So it is not enough to make a good point. It is, what is the frequency of that happening? Like what percentage of the time does he have a hand where you want to deny his equity? Or rather, what percentage, this is kind of a hint, but like what percentage of his range is a hand like that?
I think a lot of it gets cut down considerably.
Mm-hmm.
I think my reason for betting on the flop, we kind of skipped right over that, was just because I actually think it's quite connected. He can have, he's in the big blind, so he can have a lot of those middle cards,
Mm-hmm.
middle to high cards. So I think that he kisses this with a lot of like gutters and 2-over combos. He can have open enders here,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously you can have flush draws. So, but then by the turn, it's like pretty much nothing can stick around with this bet except hands that have me beat.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Like, there's nothing that can really, like, he can't have like 10 jack with a club and like peel here.
Correct.
I
mean, people can. They're bad. Some people are bad enough, but yeah. You shouldn't.
Well, this guy, if he's really V-pipping 40, if he's really a 46, then maybe he is the guy that's going there. But
so yeah, the problem is what percentage of his hands are actually, what percentage of his range are those Jack 10 one club type hands that you want to deny equity from? Because denying equity means you're kind of fine with him folding rather than getting a free card. So like the fact that he's folding Jack 10 with a Jack of clubs isn't really the point in your bet, right? You just want him to not get there for free. So like what percentage of his range do you think is a hand like that? A hand with some pretty decent equity versus you?
that's gonna force me to proof it out.
Right.
I mean, there's a club can counterfeit me, and then there's some gutters that can counterfeit me.
So how would you feel about your logic of denying equity if 100% of his range was hands like Jack 10 with a club?
Well, I guess maybe it's the wrong choice of words in terms of denying equity.
No, let me flip the question because I mean
okay.
something else. So how would you feel about your logic of trying to deny equity if 1% of his range was hands like Jack 10 with a club? And the rest of it was just like hands like 9x, ace-x, and like 7 with no club,
Yeah, no, that wouldn't be good.
Why not?
Because you're basically, you're shutting out value. You're shutting out, I mean, basically, you're never making money from any hands that you beat, and you're always piling money into spots where people have you beat. There's like no...
Right.
There's not much in between.
I mean, the way I would put it is that like you're optimizing for 1% of his range, right? So you made a good argument, but it's like 1% of his range. That's only 1% of his range, So
Yeah.
That is the point here. So you made a good point, but it's the frequency with which that happens, and I'm not exactly sure how often that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a common problem I run to students. They make very logical points. It's just either A, the frequency with which that happens doesn't happen that often, or B, the EV differential isn't a big deal either, right? So the second point is like, let's say, we said like, hey, half of his range are his hands like this, his hands with like, 12, 13 outs versus you, right? And I want to deny that equity. But if the case is like, if you just checked, you're not losing that much EV in the long run because like he bluffs when he misses, or you just get the fold when he gets there and all that, then, that isn't really a good argument because if you look at the EV difference when he has you beat checking versus betting, right? Like when he has a 9 and you bet here versus if you check, you're losing way more, right? So it's a huge EV split. So those are like the two factors. You have to make a logical point. It has to come up often, and there has to be a big enough EV differential between the two plays for your thing to make sense. And that's almost always the case.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's really thinking critically about what you're how you're manipulating their range at that point. And it's I think a lot of people suffer from this. I've seen it, myself included, which is like kind of trying to take the like name your own price line, sort of like especially on river play, like bet fold lines and stuff, or like block bets. So to me, this was kind of like a I guess I don't need to justify it any further. You gave a much better approach for it. So
all right, so this is the point where my brain stops working. So
cool.
The overall takeaway is, I mean, I'm not sure how much you can take away from this, but there is a way to be more critical about what you're doing. There's a way to be empirical, to gather data. There's better ways to check things out, test things out, better ways to analyze your hands when you are making logical assumptions, which, seems like you're pretty good at, like deducing and all that stuff. Like frequency and EV differential also matter. I think it was a really good sign that you were right about defending the big blind that you were losing, because a lot of people I talked to just have biases. Hold on one second.
Sure.
That is a spot where a lot of people are biased and they think they're losing because when you defend the big blind, you just lose most of the time, and then you win like a pretty decent sized spot. Like you put in one big blind, lose, put in one big blind, lose, put in one big blind, lose, and then eventually win. So a lot of people are just biased and thinking they lose. So I thought it was a good sign that you were right, that like you had a right intuition or feel of that. I liked most of your lines post-flop. And yeah, I think the idea, I think some of your mindset of like trying to attack, trying to be aggressive, like that isn't rigorous enough, that isn't critical enough, that isn't good enough of a reason. Trying to get 30, 40K, having a goal. It's really about just deepening your understanding, being critical about what happens, getting data, paying attention, and really figuring out what causes what works. And if you do that, like, you don't need goals, like, you'll be fine.
Sure.
So yeah, I tried to get through a lot more hands by talking more and asking less questions, but we still missed out on like 10 to 15 of them. But yeah.
So we can pick that up for next time, maybe.
Yeah, sure. There is that big blind defense stuff. I suggest figuring out ways to work on that. I mean, Pio's like a really expensive option. I'm sure you can find articles on it. I'm sure you can find videos where people are defending the big blind and all that. So yeah, you can do that.
Okay.
But I definitely think that's a very huge part of the game. So check it out. I mean, once you learn how to play in the big blind as well, you learn how to play against the big blind. So it's like a twofold type of thing, and a lot of your post flop hands are against the big blind, so it's pretty important.
Very true.
And yeah,
Um,
call that a
so
sesh.
yeah, for sure. So I definitely so I mentioned I kind of ran a quasi study group a little bit, so I always like to sort of address like a little bit of the administrative items. So, for instance, always want to be respectful of your time and your schedule and make sure you get paid. But also, I always like to schedule like the next session as well.
Yeah, sure.
Um, so, um, generally speaking, I would say Tuesday nights work well. Next week, um, I'm actually going to the Borgata next week. There's
Oh, cool.
this, what is it, the like fall poker, summer poker
Yeah.
open, fall poker open,
Oh.
it's
Can I stop the recording now? Should I stop?
sure, sure.
Yeah, that's just admin stuff.